We're just gonna skip. Yeah, I think we just skip it at this stage. It starts in 3 minutes. Okay, and then video, cameraman.
If you take off from the island, but the Air Canada through the international airport, you end up always going through somewhere else, like Chicago, or you go through Charlotte or something like that, or Atlanta.
The camera, I can't select. Where do I select the camera?
It's almost too close. You go a little further afield and hop back kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, no.
No, I can't get the camera feed. Isn't working yet.
No, it's about 6 hours. Yeah, I think if you go,
there's Skype.
Or Niagara. You go through Niagara and then down. Yeah.
Sign out. Can I stop this feed and start it again?
You always think about going around the lake. That's always like, there's no straight route, right? You go through Kingston on one end, Niagara, or yeah, if you go north, there's not much route. No, it wasn't enough. Yeah. It's good. Is Toronto your home? It is, yes. I actually live just in the new.
Turned off your camera. Oh, there we go. Got it.
Yeah, I just live around the corner. That's cool.
So we're just going to keep it basic here.
It's an old town that was annexed to the city of Toronto. But we're not it's kind of but all the shops, if you were to go west, so like the university would find more restaurants and shops and all that, just along the street.
Yeah.
Of course.
Okay, let me just test the sound.
Oh wow.
Can we just do a test on the sound? Okay.
Is that it? Is that it? Got it?
I can hear you through there.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Sound good? Is that loud enough? No? It's not coming through?
Yeah, try now.
Can you hear me now? Oh, that could be. How's that? Is that better? Okay.
Okay, perfect. So I'm only going to have a little corner of the screen, I guess. Okay. Okay, thanks, Terry. No. What do you think? Do you think it's worth it or no? No, because the computer is running the PowerPoint. Okay, like zoom out a little bit. Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks, Jerry. So, board, to control the volume, it's just here. I can go up and down in case the videos are too loud or whatever. We'll just leave this. You don't have to worry about that. And for Q&A, you're wanting to use this mic. And it turns on the bottom.
Right.
I think everything else is good to go.
Just a minute, when you say it turns on the bottom.
Hold down the red button.
Just a bit.
Yeah.
And that's on, then hold it down to go on. All right. So we're ready.
want to use the cameras for the Q&A or no? Oh, okay.
I don't think so. We just pass it around and let it go like that. So this will pick me up. Gord, so how does this get on?
Well, it's actually now broadcasting. It's on.
But we have no picture. How do you do that?
Okay, so it's going up live. That's just a PowerPoint on the screen, but what's going up live is this camera here.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone to the first of our Renew events for this year, 2015. My name is John Henderson, and we're delighted to have you with us today. We have some people in the room here from Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. Where else? Any other province besides Ontario? Okay. Pennsylvania? Good. And also, we have people on YouTube with us from, I know, British Columbia, Alberta, and a few other places across Canada. And we welcome you, and we hope that you'll find this event today and tomorrow morning on 1001 Worshiping Communities stimulating. Briefly, I just want to let the rest of you here in the room know where the washrooms are. If you go down the hall and past the principal's office, there's a men's room and a women's washroom. So you can find that, I think, fairly easy. On the side table, we have some refreshments, and Crux Books is going to be here because Vera has recommended some books which they have picked up. I'm now going to ask our principal, Dr. Dorcas Gordon, to say a few words.
As always, it is my pleasure as principal to welcome you to Knox College, which is really an amalgamated college, Knox College and Ewart College. What I want to start with is really to give a special welcome to those who are joining us by YouTube. Feels really strange to be welcoming all those people out there that aren't actually sitting in front of me, but I know this is something I need to get used to. John, we have quite a number out on YouTube from across the country. I was trying to count them all, but there are a significant group that are out there that we need to remember and pay attention to. So a special welcome to those of you who are coming in by YouTube. We really hope that we can ensure that you feel welcome in our midst and in this time of learning together. For many of you gathered in this room who are students or faculty or graduates, this is a very, very familiar place. And for others, it might just be your first time here at Knox College. And certainly to our presenter, to Vera White, a very, very special welcome. It's good to have you here with us this afternoon and tomorrow morning. I know John is going to introduce you and welcome you more fully in just a moment. My job, whether old friends or new, is to just simply welcome and to say that I hope you feel at home in the college and that this time together will be a source of nourishment for both your minds and your spirits as we listen and learn together. Let's begin with prayer, asking for God's blessing upon our time together. Let us pray. Merciful God, for the creative and life-giving energy of your Spirit among us, we thank you. For your gifts of wisdom and knowledge liberally bestowed on us, we thank you. For this time and this place in our lives, we praise and honor you. In Jesus' name, amen. John.
I think, Dorcas, we have around 18 YouTube sites across Canada. So that's more than we had last year. And I want to remind those of you on YouTube that if you want to participate in the question and answer period, you can just email me. I think I've indicated that to you. To use my email address, comes in on my handy BlackBerry, and I'll relay the questions. Last year, we had Dr. Guder speak to us on the missional church. And as we followed up on that, it was the recommendation of faculty that we follow up on his talk to us and focus on the missional church. And so Vera White's name came to the fore. And I think it was in 2012 that the Presbyterian Church USA began a new initiative called 1001 Worshiping Communities. And Vera has been very much involved in that and traveled across the states stimulating these kinds of programs. And she's here today to tell us a bit about it. She believes that the best way to make new disciples, especially among young adults and immigrants, is through starting new worshiping communities. Vera has participated in starting new churches in the Pittsburgh area, and she works with the national office in this particular initiative. She's a ruling elder, the author of numerous educational and devotional resources, and she's a person, irregardless of all the traveling she does, loves to keep traveling. Gardening, cooking, and theater. She's married and has 2 children, Alex and Adam. Welcome, Vera. We look forward to your presentations with a lot of anticipation and interest.
Thanks, John. And thanks all of you for being here today. It's just my pleasure to spend some time with you. I'm going to be talking to you in the next 2 days about something that is near and dear to my heart, something that I have a lot of passion about, something that I think provides hope and new life for God's church in this world. It's something that I think is the Holy Spirit is up to among us, and we are privileged to be part of that. John provided a great introduction for me, and I'm grateful for that, but there are just a couple other things you need to know. He told you I have 2 children, but as of 2 days ago, I now have a daughter-in-law too, so that's very exciting news in our family. And the other thing he didn't say is that I am an extreme hockey fan. Now, I may share that with some of you, but we'll probably have to agree to disagree on the team that's most important. Although many of you will probably appreciate the fact that Sidney Crosby is the captain of the Pittsburgh Penguins. So anyway, at least probably some of you share that passion with me. But I'm here to talk about this initiative called 1001 New Worshiping Communities. As John pointed out, I spend most of my life traveling all around the United States, and sometimes I even get to go beyond our borders and visit wonderful places like Toronto. In February, I'm going to be going to Cape Town, South Africa. Very excited about that. But a lot of travel happens in my work. And one of the things I find when I travel around is that the news about church is not always good news. I don't know if any of this resonates with you, but sometimes I find stories of shrinking congregations and of churches closing, really just giving up the ghost and deciding they just don't have the energy to keep on doing what they've been doing for the past 200 years. I also find that this results in lots of discouraged pastors. I'm not sure how it is here in the Presbyterian Church of Canada, but in the Presbyterian Church USA, the level of obesity and depression and addiction and divorce are all higher among clergy than in the general population. So there's just a lot of discouragement among our pastors. Another thing we've been dealing with, I'm not sure if it's true here or not, our church is leaving our denomination. Some people are just upset about certain decisions that the denomination has made, certain directions that it has gone in. And we find some of our presbyteries, more of their churches, are engaged in conversations about leaving the Presbyterian Church USA. We also find that there are a few new church starts. I understand that that's been true here as well. But when we look around us and try and compare the number of churches closing or leaving with the number of new churches, they just don't measure up. We also find that our membership is aging. The average age of a Presbyterian in the United States is 64 years old. Now, I don't know how that compares within Canada, but I do feel that in both countries, the Presbyterian Church tends to be older, richer, and whiter than the population as a whole. We look around ourselves and we wonder, where are the young people in our pews? Many of us can remember days when the Sunday school programs were filled and the youth groups were just bubbling over with life. And then we look at many of our churches today that have no children or youth or young adults. We also see very little diversity in our church. Racial, ethnic diversity, language diversity, cultural diversity in the Presbyterian Church. When you look outside the doors of our church, we find the increased secularization of our society, where many people seem to be getting along just fine without any kind of faith involvement in their lives. We have called that in our jargon, we've called that the nuns, not N-U-N-S, but N-O-N-E-S. Those are the people who check that little block that says none when asked to indicate their religious preference. So when you look at all of these things, you have to wonder, gosh, is there really hope for the church? But I wonder if God has something different in mind, something different than closing churches, discouraged pastors, and tired people. Sometimes I think that what God has in mind, I was going to show you that we tend to have old people worshiping in old buildings. Many of our buildings are out of date and have millions of dollars worth of deferred maintenance and are just not appropriate for the size or the program that the church is running today. But I wonder if God, and this has made many people feel that the church is out of touch with today's society. Are we standing at a crossroads right now? Is this the end of church as we know it? Or could this be the beginning of something brand new? Well, I wonder if what God has in mind is church that is gathered around a table rather than in stained glass sanctuaries. I wonder if what God has in mind is churches that worship in a variety of languages and cultural traditions. A place where youth and young adults are glad to hang out and where children are always welcome. Perhaps God has in mind a place that reflects the rich diversity of God's creation, where the voices of artists and prophets and outsiders are welcomed into the conversation. Maybe God has in mind a church that moves outside of its building and into its neighborhood. Well, this is what the Presbyterian Church USA had in mind back in 2012, when its General Assembly met in Pittsburgh, my hometown. It's okay to say go Penguins now, or not, where they made an important decision. And that was a decision to launch a new initiative that has become known as 1,001 New Worshiping Communities. Really what it is a church-wide movement that will result in the start of 1,001 new communities of faith over a 10-year period, all geared to reaching the unchurched and the de-churched people for Christ, and in the process of which transforming the whole of the church. Now, that's a pretty grand goal, isn't it? Pretty audacious, actually, if not for the fact that we were realizing that God was already up to something. Now, I'd like to think we Presbyterians are so smart and so strategic that we thought of this and imposed it on the church, but really it was a recognition that the Holy Spirit was at work in our towns and villages and cities doing something brand new, something that we really didn't have a name for. People were recognizing that there were groups of people meeting in homes and in bars and restaurants and gyms and under bridges and in parks and just all over the place. And they were talking about Jesus and the transformative role that God has in their lives. Some of these groups were not led by seminary-trained, ordained pastors, and that scared a lot of people off. A lot of them were not following a traditional form of worship, were not speaking English, crazy as that sounds, and we just didn't have a word to describe these things. Well, I am, as John pointed out, a long-time ruling elder in the Presbyterian Church. I don't know if there are any other ruling elders out here, or you're all teaching elders, but you probably join me in thinking that if my denomination is going to do something brand new and completely crazy like this, that I want to make sure that it is solidly grounded in Scripture. So I wanted to bring up one Scripture passage that has been really important to this movement from the very beginning, and it's from Luke chapter 10. Now, I want us to really think about this passage together, and so we're going to do it in this way. I'd like those of you who are here in the room to read it aloud with me. And if you're out there on your own in YouTube land, if you would be willing to read it along with us, that would be great. Read the passage, and as you do, and then we're going to give you a couple of few moments of silence afterward, I'd like you to just reflect on what words or phrases kind of stick with you in this passage. So we're going to think together about this for just a couple of minutes. So let's read this passage together. After this, the Lord appointed 70 others and sent them on ahead of him in pairs to every town and place where he himself intended to go. He said to them, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. Go on your way. See, I am sending you out like lambs into the midst of wolves. Carry no purse, no bag, no sandals, and greet no one on the road. Whatever house you enter, first say, 'Peace to this house.' And if anyone is there who shares in peace, your peace will rest on that person. But if not, it will return to you. Remain in the same house, eating and drinking whatever they provide, for the laborer deserves to be paid. Do not move about from house to house. Whenever you enter a town and its people welcome you, eat what is set before you, cure the sick who are there, and say to them, 'The kingdom of God has come near to you.'" Hear this passage one more time as I read it aloud. Once again, thinking about what word or phrase really stands out for you today. After this, the Lord appointed 70 others and sent them on ahead of him in pairs to every town and place where he himself intended to go. He said to them, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. Go on your way. See, I am sending you out like lambs into the midst of wolves. Carry no purse, no bag, no sandals, and greet no one on the road. Whatever house you enter, first say, 'Peace to this house.' And if anyone is there who shares in peace, your peace will rest on that person. But if not, it will return to you. Remain in the same house, eating and drinking whatever they provide, for the laborer deserves to be paid. Do not move about from house to house. Whenever you enter a town and its people welcome you, eat what is set before you, cure the sick who are there, and say to them, 'The kingdom of God has come near to you.'" Okay, I'm going to ask you to do something really scary. I'm going to ask you to turn around and find one reasonably friendly looking stranger to spend just a couple of minutes with. And really, it's no fair if you drove in the same car with someone to make that your friendly looking stranger. So you have to take a real risk and reach out and talk to someone that you don't know quite as well. If you know everybody in the room, just pick somebody that isn't your spouse or your best friend. Okay, and once you do that, you're going to introduce yourself to the person, of course. And then you're just going to take a couple of minutes to reflect out loud on what word or phrase sort of stood out for you in this passage today as you were hearing it. Now, you only have 4 minutes, so that means each person can talk twice, or can talk for 2 minutes, okay? So if one person is talking all the time, like, make sure you get a chance to say your part too. And listen to what your partner has to say. So go.
Vera, maybe the ones on YouTube could send their word or phrase into John.
That would be fabulous. If a word or phrase comes to you and you'd like to email it to John, you could do that if those of you who are out there. Okay, our time's up. Let's come back together again. Now, I want to hear a few of the brilliant comments that were discussed in your pairs, but here's the way I want to do it. Just a few we're going to hear. Instead of telling me the brilliant thing that you thought up, let us hear what your partner said. So what you're going to say is, my partner Dale said, or my partner Marcia said, or this is this is something I heard from Diane, or whatever. I think I can make this microphone work. Not sure of it. Is that correct?
We'll make sure.
Okay. Push the red button.
Yeah. I got it to on, so I guess you hit it on.
Great. Let's try it.
I don't know, Gord, you saw me do this before. What happened? Yeah, it was.
Isn't it great to have all these technical geniuses here?
Hello.
Ah, you did it. Yay. Here, I'll take it. Okay, a couple of comments that you heard in your pairing.
My partner Jeff was commenting, or he was struck by the fact that Jesus sent them out in pairs.
Yeah, great, thank you. Something else?
My friend Maud here noticed that they go without sandals, and she said she thought a lot about not going with a purse, but sandals was a new one.
Right, and that always strikes me as well. In fact, I had to go to the shoe museum this morning because I'm such a sandals person, so I can't imagine going out without sandals. What else?
My friend Glenn said you give this greeting of peace to this house. And we thought, how many of us can say that about our churches, that our churches are places of peace? And the other thing he said was that eat what's set before you, cure the sick who are there. And Glenn said, that's almost like a throwaway line, but like,
Right.
how hard or difficult is that?
Yeah.
Cure the sick who are there. What does that mean?
And when do we ever even
Yeah.
think about doing that? Thank you. What else? Maud.
My friend Charles had pointed out that the kingdom of God has come near. In church, we often think of people coming in and joining us.
Yeah.
And here, Jesus is saying, go and join with them, go out to them.
Yes. Isn't that interesting? It's like the opposite of what we've always thought, isn't it? Thank you. Anyone else? Great insights.
Yes, my new friend Nicole, who professes herself an eternal optimist, was encouraged by the fact that the harvest is plentiful.
Yeah, and we don't always see it that way, do we? Any others? Last chance. Okay, now I'll send it to you to turn it off because you're so good at it. Thank you, thank you. Isn't it remarkable how God speaks to each one of us through the passage, and together we get a much fuller understanding of the passage than we do individually. So this passage has been foundational for this movement, and I'm not going to preach a sermon on it because I understand worship starts at 4:30, but there are 3 things about this passage that have really been important to me as I've been working on this 1001 initiative. And the first is that the harvest is God's harvest. And we church people often get this wrong. We think somehow it's our job to go out into our neighborhoods and drag people kicking and screaming into our churches and make them act like us and talk like us and dress like us and believe like us. But in some ways, it is very reassuring and comforting that this is God's job. God created this entire universe and loves this world so much that God did not hold back even his only son. God longs for the reconciliation of all people and the transformation of lives and is already at work in the harvest field. The second thing I want you to take from this passage is that, as you pointed out, the harvest is plentiful. And I don't know about you, but I have a hard time seeing that a lot of times. I look at my own beloved congregation that's 250 years old. My husband and I have been members there for over 35 years. When we first joined the church, it was the job of the ushers to arrive early on Sunday morning to set up folding chairs in the aisles to make sure there were enough seats for everybody. They don't have to do that anymore. There are plenty of extra seats. In fact, there are often empty pews. And I don't see people lined up outside the door of the church waiting to get in. So I don't see a plentiful harvest. Maybe you don't either. But guess what? God said the harvest is plentiful. Are we going to choose to believe Jesus in this or not? Well, just in case Jesus' word isn't enough for us, this book came out a few years back by Clegg and Bird called Lost in America, in which they had this to say: the unchurched population in the United States is so plentiful that if it were a nation, it would be the 5th most populous nation on the planet. The harvest is plentiful. And it's not all overseas, friends. The harvest is right outside our doors, doors of our homes and the doors of our churches. And then the third thing I want you to get from this passage is that the workers are sent. Ask the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into the harvest field. We sometimes read it as if it says, ask the Lord of the harvest to keep those workers in the barn where they can wait for the harvest to come on in to them. And that's the way our churches act. But what does it mean for the church to be sent out into the harvest field? So one passage, actually one verse, Luke 10:2, 3 foundational principles. The harvest is God's, the harvest is plentiful, the workers are sent. I think you're going to see those principles underlying everything that I tell you about this 1001 initiative today. And this would probably be a good time to pause and say that I'm talking about an initiative of one particular denomination. And it's not even your denomination. So you could say, well, why do we even care what you're doing in the Presbyterian Church USA? But what's really struck me since becoming enmeshed in this whole movement is how this is happening across denominational lines and across nations. And we are working closely with churches in other denominations and with other churches of other nations all around the world, because God is up to something. Make no mistake about it. It's a grassroots, Holy Spirit-driven movement, and it's happening all over the place, sometimes in the least expected places. So I can only talk to you about what I know personally and intimately, but I hope that this will open your eyes to paying attention to what God is doing in your neighborhood. Okay, so what is a new worshiping community anyway? You might be asking that, but I'm going to tell you. We're so creative in the Presbyterian Church that we have chosen to define new worshiping community by first defining the word new, and then defining the word worshiping, and third, you guessed it, defining the word community. So a new worshiping community is a new worshiping community. Well, what do we mean by this? Well, they are new in that they're all about making new disciples for Jesus Christ, not converting Methodists, or reaching out to recovering Roman Catholics, or convincing those Presbyterians from the church down the street that they really ought to come to what we're offering because it's so much cooler than anything they ever thought of. No, this is a disciple-making effort. It's about reaching the unchurched and the de-churched people for Christ. Okay, new worshiping communities are also new in that they are exploring new forms of church for a changing culture. I told you my husband and I have been part of this church for 35 years, and we're just perfectly happy with the fact that they worship every Sunday morning at 9:30 a.m. And we sing 3 traditional hymns accompanied by organ music. And the pastor always preaches for exactly 20 minutes. And we always say the Apostles' Creed. Works just fine for us, but it might not be the most appropriate form of worship for our 22-year-old son who seldom sees 9:30 on Sunday morning. It also might not be the most appropriate form of worship for the Bhutanese refugees that live in our community who speak no English, or for the Vietnamese community that are almost all employed in the nail salons that are open on Sunday mornings. So this movement is about exploring new forms of church. Okay, new worshiping communities are worshiping. There's no compromise there. They are gathered to encounter the living Christ in word and sacrament. But we also define worship as being sent to participate in what God is already doing for the transformation of the world. So if they are only a group of people gathered together in worship, we say they don't fit the definition of a new worshiping community. They somehow need to be out of their doors and into a community, figuring out how to bless the people of that community, how to be part of that community, how to love that neighborhood. So switching on to community, new worshiping communities are communities in that they practice mutual care and accountability. Well, we know what that feels like in our own lives, don't we? We know what it's like when you're sick and people from your church come and bring you chicken soup or visit you in the hospital, or when you experience bereavement and they come and gather around you. But new worshiping communities are themselves vulnerable, and they need the connection with the wider church. They need that connection both for care and for accountability. In fact, early on in my work with new churches, this was about 16 years ago when I first started working with new church development, I gathered together a group of very creative, innovative young leaders who were starting new churches. And we had a whole day's worth of workshop and learning together. And at the end of the time, I said to this group of creative people, said, what do you need from us? And by us, I meant the presbytery or the wider church or the old fogies or the people who have been part of the church for a long period of time. And one young church planter raised his hand. Now what do you think I expected to hear? Money, of course. That's what I expected their answer would be. But this one planter raised his hand and said to me, we need you to keep us accountable. It was a huge learning experience for me. New worshiping communities need the wider church. But a little known secret is the wider church needs new worshiping communities as well. We need the energy and the evangelism and the inventiveness and the creativity and the faithfulness that new worshiping communities bring to the wider church. And then finally, communities seek sustainability in leadership and finance. Our 22-year-old son, I think I mentioned him already, just graduated from college last spring. His parents expect him to get a job. Crazy? Crazy talk? Well, maybe. It might be because we're really mean parents, but it also might be because we know that that's important for his own growth and sustainability and maturity and self-confidence. New worshiping communities also need to seek sustainability. They need to figure out how this movement can be more than a drive-by church planting, how it can really reflect the faithfulness of God by staying around for a while, both in having the finances to do that and by having appropriate leadership. It may make sense for the new worshiping community to be under the authority of the session of an existing church at the very beginning, but that doesn't lead to sustainability. It needs to be raising up appropriate leaders from its own community. And those leaders may be brand new to the church as a whole. Okay, so you've seen the definition of a new worshiping community. Some people wonder why we don't call them churches. Because if you've seen that definition, you'll probably say, as I do, that sounds like church to me, right? Well, that was an intentional decision, not because we don't think that they're church. They're real church to the people who participate in them. They're not church light or a bridge to real church or a starter church or something like that. They are real church. But by using the term church, most people immediately think of what? A building, yeah, or a program, or a pastor. And we're stripping these new worshiping communities down to some really basic core ecclesiology. What is really needed? And that is community. So the change of terminology has really sparked the imagination of the denomination. Now, it may not be the appropriate decision for you, but that was a decision for us. Anyway, you've seen the definition. It could really just be words on a piece of paper. I'd like you to see a couple of examples of what new worshiping communities look like in real life.
3 years ago in Northeast Los Angeles, 10 friends started gathering for dinner to begin dreaming about what a church might look like focused on reconciliation. We'd come to understand that an unusually high percentage of people in our neighborhood had become disenfranchised with the church, and we felt a strong call to come alongside them to become agents of reconciliation. By the fall, we began meeting as Northland Village Church, and we dedicated ourselves to meeting the needs of our neighborhood.
One of the things I love about NBC is that they're so involved in the community. If they're not involved in each of the events that go on, they're running the events. And so they're part of what makes this community thrive.
As the co-chair of the neighborhood council here in Atwater Village, a huge part of our job is always looking for volunteers, searching out volunteers. And when Nick and Northland Village Church came to Atwater Village, it was like this army of volunteers, these energetic, amazing people showed up. And no matter what we asked them to do, Nick always said, "You got it."
Today we hold worship services in a local elementary school auditorium, not for convenience sake, but because it helps us better integrate with the neighborhood. We love to host community events such as the Art Walk, our Brewfest series, and our Simplicity Sale.
The folks in the church have jumped into our community in ways that I didn't realize that they would be willing to do. They come every single day and tutor our kids in the classroom. The relationship that they have with our students and our school has been absolutely wonderful to see.
I love the intimacy of the community, how it feels like when you walk in, you're walking into somebody's home.
People are authentic, real, and they accept you just the way you are.
It's humbling to see what God's been doing, not only reconciling people to God's self, but to others. And the best part is, we're just getting started.
Okay, I'm going to ask to hear some of your reflections as to what you saw in that video that has struck you. Turn that back on again. Got it? Technical difficulties. Sorry, folks on YouTube. We're working on it here. I'm actually having people use the microphone, although it's a fairly small room here, and I'm sure we could hear each other for the benefit of those people that are not in the building. Great, thank you. So what did you notice in that video? Anybody?
The church as it is identified a need that the church as they were had been ignoring or not seeing or walking by. I really would have liked to hear more about how they came to that decision. Was there a sudden traumatic incident, or was it just long-term neglect and they went, sudden recognition of long-term neglect, let's do something about that. I mean, it's the way they describe themselves. It had to happen somewhere besides a church building.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
cannot bring people who've been traumatized by the church back to church.
Right. Yeah, I'm going to give you a little bit of backstory in just a minute, but let's hear some of the other responses first. Gordon.
Well, I was struck by a couple things. I was struck by the emphasis on worship, that even though they're justice focused or reconciliation focused, is I guess the word they used, but there was a lot of images of people worshiping. There was the gathering, there was prayer, there was singing. So really it seemed rooted in worship, and that's exciting.
Very much. Thank you. What else did you notice? What do you ever hear?
I really noticed the informality.
Yeah.
Looked like they were meeting in a porch in somebody's home,
Yeah.
in the school gym or wherever. I just the informality of it all, and the dress and the style and the hugs and the. I love that.
And they meet Sunday evening rather than Sunday morning.
It seemed very focused on the needs of the community. They were just looking out at what was needed and providing volunteers, no matter what it was. It seemed like they were just going.
Yeah. In fact, they made a decision early on that they only have one paid staff person, and that's Nick, and he's not full-time. And so they decided that they didn't have the bandwidth to create program. Now, many of you are professional church people, I know, and you can think about how much of your time you spend creating program. I spent several years as a Christian education director, and I know how much work it takes to put on car washes and cantatas and dinner theaters and spaghetti dinners and all of the things that we do in the church. And they said they didn't have the bandwidth to do that. But they were centered in a community that had a lot of community activities. So they said they'd let the community put on the program, and they would go and participate as the hands and face and feet of Jesus Christ. Were you going to say something? Oh, I thought you looked like you were. Anyone else? Okay. Okay, well, let me just give you a little bit of the backstory. Is it all right to leave this on since it's hard time? Okay, so we're going to be using it again. So Nick is what we call a commissioned ruling elder. I don't know if you have that term here, but he's a ruling elder rather than a teaching elder. Is that right? Okay. And our presbyteries can choose to commission a ruling elder to be a leader of a congregation if the mission of the presbytery requires it. And so Nick has been commissioned as a ruling elder to lead this congregation, and he's been given permission to officiate at sacraments. Now, he is now, and that's where what he was when the church was formed in 2012. He has now completed seminary and he is ordainable, but he has chosen to stay in the position of commissioned ruling elder as an illustration of the fact that God is raising up a whole new kind of leader for the church. They have outgrown the elementary school and they are now but they have not moved into a church building. They now rent a warehouse. And because their community is so made up of artists, they have just decorated it with crazy artistic expressions. And it's just, and they also now have the space 24/7 instead of just on Sunday evenings. And that's been important to them. They continue to do all of their programming outside of the building and in the community, however. Now, this community itself is about 4 years old, may have formed in 2011, if I'm doing my math correctly, about 4 years old. They worship about 100 people on Sunday evenings, so it hardly would be considered a mega church, although certainly larger than some. But they have now given birth to 7 other new worshiping communities, because they have multiplication as part of their DNA. Okay, any other thoughts about that one? I want to show you another example. We actually have about 40 of these 2-minute videos, but don't worry, I'm not going to show you all 40 of them today. But I like to show more than one so that you can sort of get a sense of the scope of the movement and realize that one of the important things about new worshiping communities is that there's no such thing as a clone. Every one of them is different because they are firmly rooted in their own neighborhoods. So take a look at this one.
You know, if you walk down Broadway, you can count almost a church on every block. And yet look around at what this neighborhood looks like. How can we have so many places that say they're worshiping God and this community look the way it looks? And so you hunger and you hope to find lay people who have that heart for growing the kingdom and giving their all to God. And so when I met Diane, I said, oh my Lord, okay, God, I get it.
You know, a heroin addict may not be so interested in food every week at a particular time. They're more interested in making sure they get their dope. And so in the interim, if they're not high, then they come by here. It just depends on the situation. Some of the working girls out there, if they have men with them, if the men allow them to eat, they'll come in and eat. Other than that, and usually that's predicated on whether or not the man is hungry. And then they'll come in together, they'll have a little something to eat, and they go back out. So I'm on my way to Princeton, as a matter of fact. When I was going to the first workshop I had gone to for 1001 New Worshiping Community, and I'm riding and I'm saying, God, I'm so tired of living in Patterson. I don't want to live here. See, the streets are dirty, the people are impoverished. You know, I want to go somewhere else with more affluent. So that was, I'm praying and talking to God on the way down. And all I could see were the faces of women who were walking down these streets, prostituting themselves. I could see the young men coming out of the liquor store. And I was going, oh my God, these are the people that God has given me a heart for.
This effort, Wings and in Prayer, Faith Works is trying to say is there is a future for you. God has a future for you. And we want to be God's hands and feet and help you see that you are loved?
Churches, wherever people are gathered in the name of God, and wherever the word of God is where the sanctuary is. So for us, the sanctuary could be on the corner of the street, it could be in the laundromat, it's wherever there are people. And when we come, we come for the purpose of meeting people where they are, touching people, interacting with them, and building relationships. And so that's our church. And when we realized people were not going to come here for whatever it is we had, no matter how wonderful it was, then the Holy Spirit said, well, go, get out of the box. Dear Heavenly Father, this is your son, Murphy, Lord. This is your beloved. This is your own life, Lord. The one who you designed and knitted in his mother's womb. Church people aren't welcomed out there. Church people are not revered out there. Church people are seen sometimes as demons out there because church people look down. Church people ignore. Church people drive by on Sunday in their wonderful cars and their fine clothes, and they don't even look folks in the eye.
What we've seen is that they say, wow, you people are for real. You know, you people really care. And so there's more of a friendly, less hostile attitude. And as a matter of fact, members of other churches are joining them. So now it's ecumenical. You know, Pentecostals, some Baptists. It's like, right, because we're trying to grow the kingdom, not our own little piece of it.
They pray for you, and that makes you feel good. And then they feed you, and that makes you feel good too.
It's people coming together, seeing each other every week. They know each other from the street. It's a community, and that's what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to have community. Sometimes when we're alone, we think we have nothing to live for. Oh, but God, we have everything to live for. There's things that you have for him to do, work you have.
It's mind-boggling, it's miraculous, it's wonderful. It's what church is supposed to be. And so now, people are coming from Wings and a Prayer to the 9:30 worship service because they're developing spiritual community amongst each other. It's about freeing up the spirit in people that's already there. And, you know, that's the blessing of this ministry.
When we do go out, it's just something magical when we can help reconnect people with the God of their youth, with the God when they were living a different type of life. God was calling me to do something more, and he also had given me the ability to look into the faces of these people and see something more than what I had seen before. Not only was I called, but I knew who I was called to help. And so for me, it's a mission. I'm on a mission for God, like the Blues Brothers. Only without the shades.
So what did you see in that one?
About 2 weeks ago, I was at a meeting on evangelism in Nashville, and we had the Aboriginal bishop for the Anglican Church in Canada speak to us. And one of the things he said is that we need a church that the poor can afford. Yeah. And I think I've just seen it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. For many years, actually for about 50 years in our denomination, I don't know what it's like in yours, there was sort of one formula for new church development, and it went something like this. First, you go out and buy a piece of property in a rapidly growing affluent suburb, and then you put up a building that has stadium seating and state-of-the-art sound and lighting equipment. And then you do a nationwide search for a staff with a proven track record in church growth. And then you get ready to launch a worship service with all of the pieces in place. And then you start baking cookies for all those people that are going to show up at the first worship service. Now, almost every presbytery in the United States has some horror story of how that plan has gone terribly wrong. You can imagine that it is an incredibly expensive way of doing church planting. And the only way it can possibly be successful is if it is in an affluent community. And yet that doesn't sound a whole lot like Jesus to me. I think Jesus would be right there in this community in Paterson, New Jersey, and is calling us to be there as well. So this is an example of what new worshiping communities look like, as we're thinking about different ways for sustainability. Other comments or thoughts, responses?
One of the things I've experienced is that people who live in a neighborhood like that, who live on the streets, have an enormous gift for taking care of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that even in the boarding homes ministry that is run in Toronto, where, you know, the theory is the Spirit is already there. That's what she said specifically, that the community is already there. As dysfunctional as it might be, or as people live through kind of the different dysfunctions of poverty. But they have a knack for taking care of themselves. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that struck me is the way that the people have moved in and worked with that rather than worked against that or worked parallel to that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Other comments or responses? Okay. Some of you, I understand, as you were coming in and talking to me, are doing ministry in a fairly rural environment. And you might say, well, gosh, this seems to work fine in an urban environment. And actually, when the movement started in 2012, most of our first several examples were from pretty urban environments. It seemed to catch on even in inner city places, but it didn't take very long before people started recognizing that some of the same needs that exist in the inner city also exist in very rural communities as well. The need for community, the need for belonging, the sense that some of the institutions of our culture have abandoned places like the inner city and the very rural communities, including the church. So the next example I want to show you, I hope this is what's coming up next, that's what I think I have lined up, is an example of a new worshiping community in a very rural community in Virginia, in the Appalachian Mountains. Let's see if you see anything different in here.
A little country church on the road to nowhere. Literally, the church was built in horse and buggy days and is no longer on the way to anywhere. It was standing at death's door. So the Presbyterian locked it, put the for sale sign up, and let the fire die out. But if there's one thing God's good at, it's resurrecting the dead. Out of the ashes, Wild Goose took flight as part of the 1001 New Worshiping Communities Initiative.
For the presbytery, the old congregation lived out its life. It had come to an end. And so this was an opportunity at Wild Goose to do something new and fresh, a resurrection moment in Appalachian culture and style.
Churched and unchurched alike are drawn to our casual Tuesday evening worship services. We call them uprisings.
I love that so many different types of people have come together to form this brand new awesome community.
I haven't been to church in the last 30 years to speak of, and I've really missed the night since I've been coming here.
In an atmosphere of authentic Christian community, our Wild Goose family celebrates God in the context of local culture.
One of the main things here is the good food and the good fellowship.
I just love Wild Goose and where we have the old hymns played with bluegrass music.
Rocking chairs, bluegrass music, square dancing, potluck suppers, we do it all as we gather to worship Jesus and experience the beauty of God's creation.
The church and the community. You don't find this everywhere. It's a great connection.
Wild Goose, the country church, sharing the good news of Jesus with those on the road to somewhere outside traditional church.
So what are you seeing in that one, in that example? Let's hear a few responses from people. What struck you there?
What I saw is that community was really building on the strengths that they already had, the culture and music, and went from there.
Right, exactly. Really focused on what the community was able to provide. So getting the connection to the Luke 10 passage, the leaders of new worshiping communities aren't going out as the evangelism team so much as they're going out as the guests of the community. Remember, Jesus sent the disciples out 2 by 2 to become the guests of the person of peace in that community. So as the guests of this community, they're making the most of the hospitality of what the community has to offer. In this case, it's bluegrass music and it's square dancing. And did you notice the beautiful quilts on the walls were made by local artists? And my favorite thing is they serve communion out of mason jars, appropriate to their community. Other reflections or comments of what you saw here?
It's just so obvious that they're having fun.
Yeah.
You know, church is about having fun. How do you have fun in Appalachia? You play bluegrass, have a potluck, and mason jars, like you said.
Great, thank you. Good reflection. What else did you see there?
There's a word that sometimes I have trouble getting my head around, and it's called winsome. And all 3 examples are people who are exhibiting the fellowship of God in a winsome way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very well said. Thank you for that. And I think there is something about what both of you just said, that sometimes the church that we know has become such a burden to us. Sometimes it's the building that's become a burden. Sometimes it's the baggage that the church carries around with us. How do we get back to what our true love is? You know, when we first fell in love with Jesus Christ and felt called to become part of that church, what was it we loved about that? And I think what the invitation to start new worshiping communities is helping people get in touch with that first love again. Any other comments on any of the 3 or all of them?
I had one of my elders tell me last week that all we really needed to do is give people what they want. And of course, I quailed at that because I'm trying to think that what they want is going to be something that won't honor God somehow. And that's something I personally have to unlearn. And they've clearly made the point that what people want in those places is to honor God with what they do.
Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail on the head that part of the work of starting a new worshiping community is becoming part of the neighborhood in a really authentic way. I mean, you wouldn't be a good leader of a new worshiping community if you didn't love that particular community. I think Diane's story when she was praying that God would remove her from Patterson because it was so awful, and what God did instead is put the people of Patterson on her heart. And helped her to see, to fall in love with the people around us. So how do we do that without, by becoming a part of what is good and gracious and lovely about that culture? Because we're always walking a fine line. How do we be witnesses to Jesus Christ and not become, and be part of a culture, but still maintain a separation from the parts of that culture that might be tearing us apart or tearing other people apart? You wouldn't want to go into the Patterson culture and become a prostitute or a drug dealer. How do you love and really be an authentic part of that culture, but also show something different? And it's always a struggle in contextual missional ministry, but you can see that line that people walk. What else did anybody want to say? Or?
I just want to follow up on what you just said, because I think there's a long history of lots of reflection on enculturation in places far away.
Mm-hmm.
How does the Christian message enculturate in Papua New Guinea?
Mhm.
And there's a lot learned
Yes.
on that. But often when we are in the North American context, we don't take those same lessons.
Right. And that is very well said, Charles. I think what we're finding is that people are missionaries, but their mission field may be their own neighborhood or a place across town. And it involves, in the same way as if you're serving overseas, it may involve learning a new language, either literally or metaphorically. It may. We're going to see a video tomorrow of a pastor who was called to move into a I don't know if you have the same term, a trailer camp, an RV community, to which she had never lived in a place like that before, and had to become the guest of the people that lived there in order to gain any kind of credibility and to be accepted there. So it's a mission field, and having to learn a new language applies if we're moving across town or if we're moving across the world. Missionary work. Any other thoughts? Okay, what I wanted you to sort of get a sense of as we sort of begin this journey together, and we're going to be together this afternoon and then also tomorrow morning. This afternoon, I'm trying to introduce you into the work that I do in coordinating this 1001 New Worshiping Communities initiative. I wanted to introduce you to some of the people that I have such admiration for. People like Nick, who's leading Northland Village, and people like Diane in Wings and a Prayer. The reason for the term Wings and a Prayer is she walked into a bar on that street and said to the bartender, because she saw a lot of the prostitutes and the drug dealers walking in and out of the bar. She said, "What food do they like that's in this bar?" And he said, "Oh, our most popular item is the chicken wings." She said, "Okay, I want to buy several buckets of those chicken wings." And she just took them out and started handing them out on the street corner. And that's where the term Wings and a Prayer came from. And then people like Edwin, who was a second career pastor, and he felt called to seminary in his, I would say he was probably, late 40s, early 50s, went to seminary because he had a heart for the people of that particular community. And in that particular area in Virginia, where he ministers, there were a whole lot of former hippies from back in the 60s and 70s that moved into that area where they could grow their own food and live off the grid, and they've stayed there, and they're potters and they're organic farmers and things like that, and they have not ever been connected with a church. And he thought, these are people that are yearning for something that provides meaning in their lives. They have a yearning for something spiritual. I think that what can fill that hole in their lives is Jesus. And I want to be prepared to minister to this group of people. And it was with that in mind that he went to seminary and that he studied bluegrass music because he wanted to minister to a particular group of people. So, excuse me. So I wanted you to have a sense of the scope of the movement. We're going to take a break in just a couple of minutes. And when we come back together again, I'm going to sort of walk you through some of the resources that make this happen. I don't think my job is to initiate new worshiping communities. I think it's to pay attention to the ones that are already out there and figure out how we can resource them and fan the flames to keep them going. And I'm going to show you some ways that I and others do that. We're going to also have a little time for questions and answers at the end of our time together. Tomorrow, we're going to shift our focus, and we're going to spend some time thinking about what is the appropriate form of leadership for the church of the 21st century. How the leadership for the church is taking on a different look, a different tone. 53% of the people that are leading new worshiping communities in our program are ordained, seminary-trained teaching elders. The others are others, and we're going to take a look at what that looks like and how we can help to train and to support a new kind of leader. So that's going to be our focus for tomorrow. So I think this might be a good place in our program to stop and take a break. How about if we come back at 3 o'clock? Does that make sense? So that's about a 12-minute break. There are restrooms down the hall, and there's lots of great refreshments. And let's come back together again. You guys, go back here.
I'm quiet, but I'll talk to you. Yes. So enjoy the presentation. I would love to go to church like this. I'm stuck in a Korean church where we have pews and we have senior elders and we have senior pastors and say, in church, stay. That's a challenge.
Well, it's actually interesting. The Koreans have actually been so much better than we have. It's starting with churches. It's actually sort of part of the sense of call. They need to start a new church.
We're struggling. Be careful with that. We're struggling. Now realizing the second generation is on the back. The reason for that is that living in American culture that expresses a lot of freedom that first generation never had. Honor thy parents, honor thy ancestors. That's a real challenge for the younger generations. Unless they're still honoring their parents by still attending. It's like you drag me to church now. I'm only doing it because of you. It's a struggle, but I'm experiencing. But of course, that's not much different. This is a Canadian context for the American lives. Finally, my daughter is back to church after high risk for 10 years. But the issue there is I now have a grandson. She now has a child. She wants to raise the church environment because of actually I turned out okay, I guess, because of what my kids told me. God put me there. It was one of those callings. It's quite interesting because we have now in the U.S. church we have separate presbyteries that have ethnic groups.
But many of the Korean churches are just part of
Okay, yeah, yes. We don't really have that. Yeah, we've got, it's either you in the presbytery. There is, we'll have an occasion Korean person in white church.
Interesting. Several of the worship communities are second generation Korean.
That would be good. I could see that. Yeah.
And some of them actually call themselves Asian because they were Asian and they are just Korean.
Yes, and Asian. Yes, I could see that. We've been fortunate to attract where our mission has been, not to my colleagues, but to people that we're gathering young adults that are coming to Canada transition type of thing. But I think if I could grow Christians in China, Colombia, or Korea, I think it's wonderful. Because their youth is how much of English. So if I could go to a church that speaks English and Korean at the same time, and have an understanding of Chinese or Spanish, it's very useful for them. And, I've talked to them and says, what do you like about church? Oh, church is boring. Let's be very clear, it's very boring, but the activities that we go out into a mission every week, and we help people out, that's very important to them. So that's to me, it's doing something
That's
that's
often
important
the
to them.
case. We've been conducting this longitudinal research project alongside this 1001 initiative, trying to study what its impact is on the whole of the church and how it's actually accomplishing. And we just published this study is very complex and has both quantitative and qualitative information. We just published the results of some interviews that were done with the worship community leaders, which they said the way they understand evangelism is very different from the way traditional leaders have understood evangelism. It's not a matter of making a decision for Jesus. It's a matter of how we're participating in helping Jesus fix the world. And
Sure,
it's
that's right.
very, there's so many people who sort of traditionalists who are just so offended by that language. But it's just interesting.
One of my statements is not buildings. We don't, one of the lessons that we have, we do not have church. We actually rent. Now, I have some properties, I would actually prefer to rent in a school than actually a existing church. But our school boards have horrendous costs. It's like 3 times our church costs. So we're kind of caught in it. Like, it was great that they got a church, a school to get there. But it's 3 times the cost.
So, and for some groups, running a church building is not a bad thing. I know but there are some people that never understand.
That's right, absolutely. I saw the sign, I came down twice, I walked away because I felt afraid to go to the church. She eventually came in. And the only reason she stayed is because we were young people. Because she came in on Mother's Day, just kids who visit her. Oh, yeah. And really, if they had just love, so it was perfect. Great times. I'll let you talk. I've got all my coffee down.
I'm on a fellowship. Just
So happy that you could come.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
I'm teaching a course on church ministry and sacraments.
Oh.
Tomorrow morning, the students from that course have to attend.
Oh, wonderful.
So
or maybe wonderful. Maybe, yeah, great,
but,
good.
That'll create a different
So
dynamic.
you're a professor here at Knox then, okay. And what is your subject?
I teach systematic theology in the undergraduate level. I'm a theologist. I teach missions. So,
okay.
So I do both.
Yeah.
We're both hats here.
Yes, good. So do you know the new missiology professor at Pittsburgh Seminary, Scott Hagley?
No.
Okay, well, you've probably, he's a really good guy, and he's been part of helping us provide some.
Neither died.
Yeah, Yanni.
I'm a South African. So
Oh, okay. He was wonderful, such a wonderful friend, and dear friend.
Yeah, and I'll be in Cape Town when you are.
Really, for Fresh Expressions, or?
No, I'm teaching at the University of Western Cape at Stellenbosch.
Wonderful.
But Fresh Expressions, is there something?
Yeah, they're having their international Fresh Expressions International Conferences in February. There, I could certainly give them to you before we leave here. I just don't remember off the top of my head, but
if I'm there,
yeah, that would be really fun. Yeah. Okay, let's gather together again, please. For the sake of our friends on YouTube, we want to stick to the schedule. So I was just saying to someone, it's very humbling to be following Daryl Guder in this lecture series. He's just one of my my great heroes of the faith, and such a wonderful teacher and great theologian. I was honored to be able to attend his last class at Princeton as he was retiring. So, and he's going to be participating with me in a number of other theologians and practitioners in a theological consultation at the end of this week. I'm leaving here and going back to Pittsburgh, and we're going to gather a lot of I'm only the convener, trust me, I'm not one of these brilliant minds, but we're going to gather a lot of the brilliant minds together to think theologically about this whole movement, to see if we can produce some theological resources to help to undergird the initiative, and Daryl's going to be part of that. So if those of you, if all of you were here last year, I don't know if you all were or not, to be part of the lectures at that point, I'm sure he did a wonderful job, and it's just a joy to be able to be following him, following in his footsteps. So I hope you had a nice break. We're gonna talk a little bit about more of the nuts and bolts at this time, and then we will pause about 15 or 20 minutes before the end, and we'll have a question and answer session. And we'll certainly include the people that are out there in other parts of the country tuning in with their questions that they can email to John. So what's next here? This is our website, 1001.org. You can see the URL address up at the top there. There's probably a pointer on here somewhere, right? I don't see it. Right with that? Okay, yeah, okay, that's the URL address. We're not live with the website, so I can't actually walk you through it. But if you look under this About 1001 button, there'll be a drop-down menu, and one of the things it'll say videos, and it will take you to those videos. As I said, we have about 40 of the 2-minute videos. The Paterson, New Jersey one, we tried to do that a little differently, so that one's about 5 minutes long, but all the others are 2 minutes long. And they just show the great variety and depth of the movement. And that's, I think, the best way to start getting to learn about it is just sort of noodling through those videos and watching several of them to get a sense of the breadth and depth of the movement. Everything that I'm talking about here you can find on the website, and I'll be referring to a lot of the resources as we move on here. One of the things you'll also find on the website is a map of the United States. It also includes Puerto Rico, which you can't see in this little piece of it, but it shows all of the new worshiping communities that we have going on. There's a little expansion tool, and if you can see that there's some places like around Los Angeles and around New York, there's so many that they're all just on top of each other. You have to expand them to see. But if you hold your cursor over any of those little dots, you'll get more information about that particular new worshiping community. So if you're doing any traveling and want to see if you might want to visit something, or if you just want to contact somebody that's doing something similar to what you have in mind, it's a tool for you to connect with other people that are doing the work. One of the things that's on our website is a downloadable version of this resource. This is our primary print resource. I have a few copies up here, which if you want one, you're welcome to take. But you can also order them. They're free if you prefer to have it in hard copy, or it's also downloadable from the website. But it's called, creatively enough, Starting New Worshiping Communities. Now, as you may imagine, there's no such thing as a manual. Anybody who tells you that there are 12 easy steps to starting a new worshiping community is lying, so don't believe them. So we call this a process of discernment rather than a manual. But it helps you walk through that process of getting to know a particular neighborhood, coming to understand and connect with the people in that neighborhood, doing some missional experimentation, coming up with a strategy for a new worshiping community, figuring out what it's going to cost you to do it, how to work with your presbytery or other governing body, how to work with other churches in the area. And I just think it provides a real good, it's sort of a good field guide for the work that you would be doing. I have a few staff people. Our staff is not very large. It's myself and 3 regional people. Shannon Kaiser works in the eastern part of the country, the eastern part of the United States, and she also coordinates our coaching program. We think that this work is too important for you to do it all by yourself. It's also really hard work, and it can be very lonely and isolating work. As you may imagine, there are a lot of traditional church people that don't understand the work of starting a new worshiping community. In fact, some traditional church people are threatened by it. And so sometimes, even if you find yourself surrounded by other Presbyterians, you may also feel isolated and alone. And that's the purpose of our coaching program. We have about 80 trained coaches in the Presbyterian Church USA, and we also have about 6 that our program is trained from the Presbyterian Church of Canada that go to all of our coaches training events and are ready to go and to work with people here. They have been very faithful to the training program. And a coach doesn't have the answers, although every one of our coaches has participated in starting a new worshiping community, but they will walk beside you and listen to you and help you find the answers in your own context. We hope the people that are starting a new worshiping community will connect with a coach very early on in the process. We require it as people move further into it and are looking for more advanced grants from us, but we hope that they will connect early on because they will see the value in doing so. But Shannon would be the person to talk to if you wanted to hear more about our coaching program. We also have an assessment. An assessment is a 3-day event, and I understand that several people from the Presbyterian Church of Canada have participated in our assessments as well, and we encourage you to do that. We love working together. We feel like you're a partner denomination. But a 3-day event for anyone who may be sensing that God may be calling them to start a new worshiping community. And want to find out, well, do you have what it takes to do this? What particular gifts or skills would you be bringing to the table? What are some of the things that will be particular challenges for you? We use some tools such as the Strengths Finder with the Core Clarity component to it, and we use the Myers-Briggs tool. But it's also a time of teaching and a time of actually being out in a community, being observed by one or more of the assessors. And there's also about an hour-and-a-half competency-based interview. We encourage, if people are married, to participate in the assessment with their spouse, even if the spouse isn't involved in ministry at all. But we found that research shows that one of the most important components to sustainability is spousal support, and we're able to discern whether the 2 members of the couple will work well together. Kaz Minter is my colleague that works with the assessment. Another tool that we use to help prepare people to start a new worshiping community are our internships. We have 10-week summer internships. We have 9-month program year internships. And we have full year, full-time residencies. Anybody serving in any of these positions receives a small stipend, and they actually do the work of helping to start something brand new under the direction, under the supervision of somebody who has done this kind of work before them. It's an invaluable way of learning what it takes to do this kind of work. It's part of your discernment process. Most of the people who participate in our internships are college or seminary students or recent seminary graduates, but not all of them are. We occasionally get people of different ages and stages in their lives that will participate in an internship. Sarah Hayden is my associate that works with the internships. So one of the things I get asked most frequently, I'm wondering if you were wondering yourself, is how are we doing with this initiative that took off a little over 3 years ago? Probably the most frequently asked question I get is, well, how many do you have now? Some people, including Daryl Guter, think it's a shame that we attached a number to it, feeling that perhaps that isn't very theological and that maybe we're imposing American consumerism on a spiritual initiative. But I do think the number helps to keep us accountable. And so I'm really happy to be able to tell you that right now we have 310 of these communities. But actually, what's more exciting for me, even than that, is that they're spread out over 115 presbyteries. Now, what that says to me is that they're not, although we have a great cluster in the LA area and the Chicago area, they're not just limited to our dense population centers, but they're spread out all across the country. And in case you were wondering, we have 171 presbyteries altogether. So I'm just excited about how broadly it has been embraced by the church as a whole. But some other numbers, if any of you are numbers people, that I think are exciting to contemplate is that 78% of the participants in new worshiping communities are brand new to our denomination. Now, some of them have come over from another denomination, but many of them have come from no faith background at all, or even if some people who have come in from other faith traditions. 53% of the participants are racial ethnic. Now, I'm not exactly sure how it is in your denomination, but the Presbyterian Church USA is a very white denomination. In fact, for many decades, we have made it a prime objective to increase the racial ethnic diversity of our denomination with very little positive result in that. We're still less than 10% racial ethnic. And so the fact that this initiative has just come right off the starting block, being that strongly racial ethnic, is very encouraging to me. I think it is showing that it has the potential for really changing the face of the denomination altogether. Another exciting statistic is 64% of the participants are under the age of 40. I'm not sure how it is here, but we have found that millennial generation is the least churched generation that our country has ever known. And to find that and many of them describe themselves as being spiritual but not religious. And so new worshiping communities that gather in a restaurant or a bar or somebody's home rather than in a church building may have a way of penetrating that defensiveness against traditional church. We find that 57% of these communities meet in places other than a church building. Now, a church building is not necessarily a bad thing, depending on the community you're trying to reach. In fact, for many new immigrant groups, a church building is a real plus. And so if you can find an existing church where you can nest, where you can share space, that can be a real help. But there are many groups of people who have been hurt by the church at some point in their life, and walking into a church building is an obstacle that they may not be willing to overcome at first. And so meeting somewhere else, like a movie theater or an elementary school, might be more comfortable for them. 53% of the leaders are ordained teaching elders, as I mentioned before. And we find that these new worshiping communities are inspiring the whole of the church. So it's not simply the fact that they are reaching new people for Christ, which would be enough in and of itself, but the effect is washing back over the existing church and having an impact there. So I am going to show you one more video, but this is of a different kind. Instead of it showing a particular new worshiping community, this is this was filmed from the perspective of 3 different presbyteries that have found joy and renewal in hosting new worshiping communities. That little URL at the bottom is the place where all of these statistics are posted. You can get to it more easily than copying down that crazy through the website if you click under resources. One of the things little sidelight here. One of the things that we've really been blessed with is having a great research team at the PCUSA that is conducting a 10-year longitudinal research project to help us understand what this ministry is doing and what it's not doing and what its impact is on the church and the culture. So there are some good statistics attached to this. But anyway, the next video I wanted to show you.
A group of people with a dynamic pastor came to us, and we could not say no.
Saying yes was not that hard when we realized that the things we've been doing are not working so well.
In the past, we'd failed in new church developments, but we realized that was all right, and that God had a new model for us.
The presence of the worshiping communities, I think, is an inspiration to the whole Presbyterian.
The new life that is coming from worshiping communities is infecting all of us, because now we are bringing that energy into Presbyterian meetings.
Our church has a calling to go into the world. And if a church will move into the neighborhoods outside of its walls, people are hungry to be loved. But we've got to be open to doing it in new ways outside of the 4 walls that we have.
The new worshiping communities challenge the traditional congregations to engage more intentionally in the world, and the traditional congregations challenge the new worshiping communities to really lift up our Reformed tradition.
Sometimes it can feel a little threatening to existing congregations. The fact is that we need both.
New worshiping communities are helping traditional churches, because traditional churches are saying, what are we learning? What are they teaching us?
We didn't have any big grand plan. We didn't know what we were doing. We were just trying to pay attention to the Spirit. People are hungry for God, but people aren't looking to traditional churches.
God is absolutely preparing the field. It's ripe for harvest, and God is preparing leaders. And we have to figure out how to find those leaders to be in the field, not traditional leaders that we've had in the past, but we're going to risk something under a bridge, in a coffee shop, in a movie theater. It's going to reach people who want to know Jesus.
So I think the illustration there is the impact that new worshiping communities are having on the whole of the church, which to me is really an extremely exciting part of this initiative. Anybody see anything there that they would want to comment on? Yeah, go ahead. Maybe I should give you the famous microphone. I think that passing the microphone around is a great idea, but I don't think it's conducive to great interaction.
It's very ritualistic, though.
There you go.
I was really struck by the fact that, yes, they were willing we called it the congregational leaders that were featured, were sure that they were going to learn something from the new communities, and they knew that it should be mutual. It's not an either or equivocation. You have something to learn from us, we have something to learn from you, and unless there's an openness like that, then it's always a numbers competition. I was at a General Assembly of our own church a couple of years ago when a similar motion was put to the floor and there were numbers attached and a deadline. And I tried to amend the motion to remove the numbers because I thought that the numbers were going to push us into a box. It was going to make it an all or nothing sort of thing. I can see that, you know, in the first 3 years or 4 years, if you have 300 communities, in the next 7 years, if you have 300 more, does it have to, you know, you're not reaching a grand scale. You may develop 1,001 or 2,001, of which in 10 years, only 500 are active, you know. It can be fluid.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I saw in the leadership there, saying this is a fluid thing. We'll offer you our Reformed traditions. You offer us your energy and enthusiasm, and we'll take both.
Yeah,
that's all right.
I think you've really touched on several key components. How many of you are familiar with the Fresh Expressions movement in the United Kingdom? Yeah. If you're not familiar with it, you might want to Google it. It's Fresh Expressions UK. There's actually a Fresh Expressions Canada and a Fresh Expressions US, but the one in the UK began in 2003. So they really began almost 10 years before we did. So it's been sort of, since ours is a 10-year initiative, it's sort of nice to follow, to pay attention to what they've been doing. And one of their key terminology is a mixed economy. And what they mean by that is that there's one Church of Jesus Christ, but there are many different expressions of that church. And that God chooses to use both traditional, what we call traditional expressions, they call them inherited expressions, and fresh expressions of church to reach the whole of the world with the whole of the gospel. And I think, as you pointed out, these presbytery leaders were saying is that we need both. We need traditional church because of its history and its foundation and its faithfulness and its sustainability, but we need new expressions because of their creativity and their generativity. So yeah, that was very well said. Thank you for that. Yes, thank you. I feel like it's the conch shell, right? Yeah, right. Any other thoughts or reflections on that, or on what Jeff said? All right, let me see. Moving on. Some of you asked me, well, how do we as a church, as the traditional or inherited church, what can we do to help encourage new innovation, new activities like this? And so I thought maybe a good thing to add to my PowerPoint was some thoughts that I have for the whole of the church. These are really just my thoughts. You probably could add a whole lot more yourself, but just some things that, that based on my own experience, I would pass on to you in your positions as seminary professor or seminary principal or pastor of an existing congregation or member of a presbytery that might be helpful if you're thinking about renewal for the church as a whole. One of the thoughts I have is that instead of doing what we do so well in the Presbyterian Church, which is top-down administration and 10-year plans and strategy, is paying attention to what God is already up to. It involves learning a new way of looking at the world. As you walk around in a community, even your own neighborhood, see if you can identify God sightings, God moments. What are you seeing? Maybe they don't go under the name of church, but where are you seeing God at work? Where are you seeing a Holy Spirit moment in your life? And if you personally can begin to start paying attention in a different kind of way, and then encourage your congregation to do the same thing. Some leaders of congregations will just ask people on Sunday morning, where did you see God at work this week? And let's start realizing that the primary actor is God, not us. and that what our role is to pay attention, to look, to listen, to smell, to taste, and see what God is up to. Another sort of a piece of advice from Vera here is extending hospitality. And this can be done in simple ways as if you are a presbytery leader, simply letting your presbytery know that you would love to see some examples of innovative ministry. What's going on out there? Some ways you can sort of institutionalize this is to invite proposals to come to you. Maybe you don't have a whole lot of money. I think there are a lot of presbyteries that have very little money. So sometimes what you can offer is not really even costing you very much. Maybe you can offer people an opportunity to have a phone conversation with a coach. Maybe you could offer them an opportunity to go to a conference that's available out there. Maybe you can offer them a small grant, and maybe it's not even a whole lot of money. Maybe it's $1,000 or $500. But if you are letting them know that you are welcoming new ideas, and you're saying that as often as you can and as widely as you can, because some people don't even know that the presbytery is interested in hearing from the outliers and the outsiders and the prophets and the creative people. So extending hospitality. Another one is reward the behavior that you hope to see. So sometimes we reward behavior that we don't hope to see. You know, are you looking for innovation? Well, that's where you want to give your attention. That's the or do you want to see people to abide by the rules and do things the way they've always done them? So what are you giving the attention to? So who is being promoted at a presbytery? Who's making a presentation at a presbytery meeting? Is it a new idea? So showing and lifting up the things that are and rewarding them with grant money. I know that your denomination, I met with some denominational leaders here yesterday afternoon. They have been giving out a lot of grant money. So what is the money being given for? Is it being given to reward innovation and creativity and experimentation, or is it being given to reward, doing the same thing that you've always been doing? Oh, wow, that happened fast. Pray. I know this sounds like, oh yeah, duh, of course, but this has been a real eye-opener for me. I told you that I come from Pittsburgh, and some of you may remember that Pittsburgh was the center of the steel industry until around the 1960s. And then all of the steel mills closed, and Pittsburgh back in the late 60s and early 70s is very much like Detroit is today, just kind of a washed out city. In fact, the economy was even worse in Pittsburgh in 1970 than it is in Detroit today. And the population is less than a half now than it was when I was growing up in Pittsburgh. So in many ways, plus we are Presbyterian Central. Like everybody in Pittsburgh was Presbyterian. The whole Scotch-Irish population, settled there in the early days of the steel industry. So we have Presbyterian churches on just about every street corner. When I started working for Pittsburgh Presbytery in 1999, we had more churches than any other presbytery, and we had a smaller geographical location than any other presbytery. What that meant was that we had Presbyterian churches on every street corner. In fact, there are plenty of places in Pittsburgh where you can see two Presbyterian churches right across the street from each other. So, least likely place in the world to do new church development, right? But very soon after I started working there, one pastor stood up on the floor of Presbytery and said, I move we learn how to do new church development here. We hadn't started a single new church for over 40 years. And during that period of time, we had closed over 60 churches. So he said, I move we learn how to do new church development again. So if I ever needed proof that the Holy Spirit exists, it's the fact that the Presbytery voted overwhelmingly to affirm that motion. Yes, we're going to learn how to start new churches. The only reason it ended up in my job description was because I was the newest staff member, and they figured, well, Vera can figure it out. I'm pretty sure I'd never even heard the term new church development at that point, but I figured, how hard can it be? There are other places that are starting new churches. So we'll just bring in the experts to tell us how to do this. So we brought in quite a few experts, one after another, to tell us how to do new church development. And every single one of them told us the formula that I shared with you earlier. First, you buy a big piece of property, then you build a building, then you do a national search for a whole staff, music director, youth director, children's minister, pastoral staff, the whole works. And then you do a big advertising campaign saying, new church coming soon. And that's how you do it. Well, our Lutheran friends like to say that Presbyterians are denser in Western Pennsylvania than anywhere else in the country. And we actually take that as a compliment. Well, as proof that that is true, we had to hear the same formula at least 10 or 12 times before it suddenly occurred to us that there's nothing about that formula that was going to work in our environment. So I remember this group of people, we call it, our presbytery actually formed an administrative commission for new church development. And I remember the day we were sitting around a table in the conference room, and we just sort of looked at each other and we said, oh my gosh, there's nothing about this that's going to work for us. What do we do now? And then I just remember the light went on for everybody. It just went around the table and all this light went on in everybody's heads. And we went, oh yeah, pray. And that's when we started praying. We started meeting. We made an agreement to just gather together to meet and pray that the Lord of the harvest would send out workers into his harvest field. And we stood up on the bluff overlooking the city of Pittsburgh and prayed for the city. We went to neighborhoods and prayer walked to neighborhoods and just started praying that God would do something in the way of church planting. And lo and behold, crazy projects started coming to us. People started coming and saying, we want to start a church here. We heard you're interested in church planting. And all of these crazy projects just started coming to us. So when I say pray, I'm not saying that as a throwaway. I'm saying that as an integral part of this whole process. Prayer is an acknowledgement that church planting is God's work, not our work. It's not the work of creative, energetic pastors of starting churches. It's not the work of presbyteries. It's not the work of entrepreneurial leaders. It is Holy Spirit work. And prayer puts you in touch with that. What else? The other thing a presbytery can do, or the wider church can do, is provide authority for the people that are doing things. As we said earlier, not everyone who's going to start something new has the credentials. But sometimes the presbytery can make it possible for people to do something that hasn't really been part of the system before. And then finally, what I want to say is stay in relationship with the people that are doing this kind of work. They're doing work that almost nobody else is going to be able to do. And they are, by their very nature, going to challenge the system. People who start new churches have been called pioneers, have been called entrepreneurs, they've been called the research and development arm of the church. And by doing that, by their very existence, they're going to be pulling chains. And they're going to be pushing people's buttons and getting people nervous. So sometimes the most important thing that we in the wider church can do is provide that little ring of protection. The way our line protects Sidney Crosby because he's going to get all the hits. Well, those people are going to be getting the hits as well. And sometimes what we need to do is provide that protection for our people that are doing this kind of work. So anyway, I don't know if that's helpful or not, but I think sometimes people think that what presbyteries need to do in order to help this ministry happen is dump a lot of money into it and write a lot of rule books about how to do it. Now, eventually, it's very nice if presbytery has some money to put into it, but it's not I think that giving grants is important. It matters. I think it's the least important resource that we can pour into church planting. It gets people's attention. That's why I like it. And you can also use it to connect people with more important resources. But I would say that just as many new worshiping communities have failed because too much money has been poured into them, as have failed because not enough money has been poured into them. So anyway, these are just some of my thoughts as to ways presbyteries can be helpful. Okay, I think maybe we'll move to a question and answer time here. And then if we have more time at the end, there's some other things we can do here. John, did you want to moderate that, or how do we do that?
Probably easier if I pass around the mic.
Okay.
Focus on answering questions. Yes. It vibrates, so I know.
I think I left it on.
I didn't see a light, that's all. Charles.
I'm wondering about your experience of Presbyterian barriers. Reading a lot about and being connected with people in the Fresh Expressions movement. I know that in the Anglican Church, because the Archbishop of Canterbury supported it, and there's a very strong top-down authority to the bishops to have to integrate these Fresh Expressions in the UK. That's helped a lot. Our system often shoots itself in the foot in the sense that our democracy sometimes makes it very hard to do things that are not done, haven't been done before. Can you talk about the barriers and how to overcome them in a Presbyterian system?
Yeah, really good question. And trust me, there are many times when I wish we had an archbishop that could just say, yes, we're going to do this. See what I was going to say here. Pause for just a moment. I'm sorry, I had something I was going to say and it just left my head. What I'd like to say is that almost everybody likes the idea of new worshiping communities theoretically. Almost everybody hates it when it's going to go into their own backyard. And one of the things that we are able to do in the Presbyterian Church is gather together and block things from happening. And we can hold things up in committee meetings for years, really. So what happens if, now there's tons of research that shows that a new worshiping community or a new church going into a neighborhood does not have a negative impact on the existing churches there. This was true 30 years ago when Lyle Schaller showed it, and it was true just about 5 years ago when a Gallup poll showed the same thing. So a new church does not negatively impact an existing church. Nobody believes that, however, even though it can be demonstrated. So when people hear of a new worshiping community coming into their neighborhood, they immediately feel threatened. And so suppose you are the pastor of a small church that's been declining for dozens of years, that is tired and burned out, and they hear about a new worshiping community coming in and feel immediately threatened by that community. So immediately what you do is gather together all of your friends who are also leading small, dying churches and say, okay, vote with me on this one, and we will vote against this when it comes to vote on the floor of Presbytery. And I've seen that happen many different times and in different places. Now, if you're in a presbytery where everything is pretty well spread out, you may not encounter that. As I said, my experience was in a presbytery that was where everything was very close together. All of those 160 churches in Pittsburgh I can get to within 45 minutes. So they are really tightly packed together. I thought our presbytery did something that was really smart. It doesn't work everywhere, but they appointed an administrative commission to oversee new worshiping communities. And that allowed us to make decisions that didn't have to go to the floor of Presbytery for support. Now, I don't think, after doing this for, 15 years now, I don't think that would be necessary in that presbytery because people have seen the advantage of this. But at first, it allowed us to bypass some of that negativity and to get some track record of doing some exciting things. So that's one way of doing it. It's also really good to spend time with relationship building with some of the gatekeepers and the naysayers in the presbytery. If you can get some of those people on board, people that others trust, that really makes a difference as well. Others?
Is this 1001 movement, was it, when it came to General Assembly in 2012, were there a lot of people at the grassroots urging this? Was this some idea that someone had? Like, I'm just thinking about here in Canada, if we could have I'd be happy with 101 in the Presbyterian Church in Canada. Yeah. But how did it emerge? And now clearly it's become a part of the national structure of the PCUSA. It's part of the institution in Louisville. But how did that get to assembly, and how did that get resourced by the church?
Great question. Now, I'm probably not the best one to answer it because they hired me after it passed, so I didn't really see all those early stages. But what I understand is that it wasn't like there was a grassroots push for making this part of the grand strategic plan of the Presbyterian Church USA, but there was a grassroots movement going on of these little things, projects, crazy things popping up all over the place. Those were recognized by some key leaders of the denomination, both at a presbytery level and at the Presbyterian Mission Agency national church level, who developed the proposal and sent it to one of the General Assembly committees. And that committee brought it to the General Assembly. So it was a recognition by people in leadership roles of something that was already going on out there, and then shaping, giving a name and a definition to it, and then taking that to forward for General Assembly action.
Just following on from that question, you indicated there were internships and practicums and residency, etc. So you had to have got it into the national budget. And that's often a really challenging thing to do. So just if you could say a few words about that.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you that this is all paid for and well-funded long into the future, and money is no object, but that would be wrong. There actually is some money in the Presbyterian Church USA that has been donated by saints of many generations ago for the sake of starting new churches. Now, written into most of those donations, most of those funds, is the caveat that it's to be used for putting up buildings to start new churches, mostly on the frontier. And many of this money was given in the 19th century when the westward expansion was in full swing, and people were recognizing that when new towns were founded out west, they were going to need new church buildings. Because the understanding was that in order, as a new town grew up, they would need to have a saloon, and they would need to have a doctor's office and an undertaker, and they would need to have a church. So as we have come to realize in recent years, that building buildings is probably not the best way. In fact, it's probably the worst way of starting new worshiping communities. We have we are right in the middle right now. Some of these funds are board designated, and that has not been too hard to try and get those funds turned over to this initiative. But some of them were donor designated, and that of course requires that we go to the secular courts to have the funds repurposed. So when I get to Louisville on Monday, I'm going right into a Cypre meeting with a whole bunch of attorneys where they're preparing a case to take to the secular courts to have this money turned over for this purpose. If that happens, then I think so right now we've been working on some board designated funds that have been reused for this purpose. We do have a fund development person that's working with us. And we're just hoping that we believe that this is what God is wanting us to do, and that God is a generous God, and that the resources will be there, but it's a struggle every single year.
Anyone else? Dale? question with regard to the sacraments themselves with regard to new communities. It seems like in Presbyterian Church USA, you're blessed by allowing others to provide the sacrament of communion. Can you tell us the history of that a bit?
Yes, there are a number of different ways that that gets handled, because we do believe that part of our definition is that the community is gathered to encounter Jesus Christ in word and sacrament. So that means sacraments are important part of new worshiping communities. So you've been paying attention and noticed that only 53% of the leaders are seminary trained ordained clergy. So what does that mean? Well, it means a variety of things, and it varies from presbytery to presbytery as to how open they're going to be to these kinds of things. In some cases, in many cases, a new worshiping community partners with an existing congregation, and the pastor of that congregation will come and serve communion or do baptisms. In some cases, the person who's leading it is a ruling elder, and the presbytery is able to give that person, commission that person, and allow that person to officiate at sacraments. That's one of the things our polity allows. Some presbyteries don't think that's a good idea, and they will not do that. Many of the people who are leading new worshiping communities are new immigrant people who have been ordained in another denomination overseas. And maybe that denomination has not traditionally had the same kind of educational requirements. In many countries, theological education is a 2-year program, post-secondary, so it would be the equivalent of a junior college experience. But our new revision of our Book of Order allows us to recognize that as equivalent to ministry. And the presbytery can recognize that ordination and allow that person to be seen in a pastoral role. And yeah, so those are, and even people, I've worked with one congregation whose leader was ordained as an elder, a ruling elder in the Presbyterian Church of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the presbytery chose to recognize that ordination as equivalent to a ruling elder here and commissioned him to be the leader of that community. So there are a lot of creative ways of using the Book of Order as a tool rather than as a, yeah.
Jeff?
Excuse me.
That was my question. Okay. All right. Just for interest's sake, we have the same provisions in the PCC, so ruling elders can be given permission by the presbytery to serve sacraments under certain conditions. My question is, one of the things that's happening in the PCUSA as well as here is we're closing down a lot of churches and we're amalgamating churches. I'm wondering, because these don't often go well, because you have, social dynamics, people have to get along, long-standing traditions in different communities. Are there some of these new communities that have come out of that kind of situation, and what can we learn from that?
Yeah, a really interesting question. And that's one of the frequently asked questions that I get. Can an old church become a new church? My answer to that is usually not. An old church has a lot of things that a new church doesn't have. It may have an installed pastor. It has a session. It may have a building. It has traditions and history. It has programs that it has been running. All of those things do not exist in a new worshiping community and may prevent them from becoming a new worshiping community. Most of the people that ask that question ask it because they are completely out of funds and energy and are no longer connected with their community and want to get another grant to help them to live for another few months before they have to actually turn out the lights and close the doors for real this time. That can't happen. That's just not possible. Now, the reason I say it's almost never possible is that every now and then you get a brilliant example of a older dying church that has an incredible rebirth. One example happened a few years ago right outside of Atlanta, Georgia. 3 small churches where everybody in them was over the age of 80. and they had run out of energy, but they were in a community where their buildings were worth something. And they got together and said, what if we join together? What if we sell all 3 buildings? What if we what if we call a Spanish-speaking pastor? And what if we all commit, all of us serving as elders, commit to leaving that role, to retiring as elders, as soon as that pastor gets on board and feels ready to raise up some new leaders from the community. So they called a pastor who came in from Puerto Rico, who speaks Spanish and English well. That person hired an African-American music director. And these elderly elders stayed on board until new people started. All of the new members and new baptisms were racial ethnic people. The original, all 3 communities were all white. And these elderly people started saying, okay, you're ready to have new people come on board. And the pastor said, oh no, you are the brilliant people that came up with this idea. We want you to continue, serving your terms and gradually pass the baton. And it has been a love fest between those elderly people and the new people coming in and the pastor. And it really has. They've changed their name. They have just really reached out to that community. So it can happen. Now, the other side of the question, which does work, is occasionally an old church will have a vision but no energy to fulfill it. And they will make the decision that it's time for them to die quietly and well. And they would like to donate their resources to starting something brand new in that community. And we have seen that happen.
I have a question from Peter Bush in Manitoba. I simply note that at the 2010 assembly, an additional motion was introduced to the Presbyterian Church, to our assembly, that in the spirit of taking bold risks, the Presbyterian Church in Canada committed itself to the vision of planting 10 congregations a year over a 5-year period, 12 to 16. Comment. That is just over 1 congregation for presbytery. The motion was defeated. So that's not really a question, it's a statement, but.
I wonder why. I mean, does anybody know any background there?
That's the assembly I was at, and that was the motion. I was trying to change the numbers, take the numbers off, because I felt the numbers were restrictive. It was an odd kind of assembly. There was no energy for the new. You need to know that they were being hosted by the Presbytery of Cape Breton, where tradition is king. And I think we were so inundated by the traditions, and it was a love fest of a different kind. At the time, the Presbytery itself was desperate for new ideas and new ways to minister to the churches they had. They didn't think they needed new churches, they just needed new ideas. And I don't know, perhaps my memory of it's not going to be as good as Peter's, of course, but I think it was just the wrong time for that idea. We, in our own presbytery, recently, as I told Vera, have invited someone out to come and talk to us about how to re-energize ourselves and how to think about new ideas and new ways to be the church. The Presbytery Committee had planned for a group of 50 or so, because the last time we had this conversation was 10 years ago. The conversation didn't go well. People weren't ready for the change. We had over 90 attend. I had to actually turn people away because we hadn't rented a big enough room. So suddenly now in our presbytery, people are ready for the conversation. And it's going on even as I sit here. I think, apologies to Peter, it was just the wrong time.
And was it the wrong place? I mean, I think we've been talking about the top down, the bottom up, the grassroots. So it sounds like you've got the grassroots ready to talk at the present time. But in some places, but the General Assembly makes decisions for the whole church. And that may not be the place for what you're talking about in terms of the need to observe what is going on and then bring what is going on to the attention of the assembly, rather than the assembly trying to make a decision in ex nihilo, I guess.
Yeah. Good point.
I know in our presbytery, we have spent 3 to 4 years now looking at the decline of our churches and shutting them and trying to get them to amalgamate, etc. And that's taken a lot of energy. We've had many, many meetings with paid facilitator. And I've always had this urge to say, why don't we start some churches? Because we're focusing on closing them. Let's start some. And so that raises a question for me, and particularly in that last example where the 3 churches started talking. Do you come over to Macedonia and help us? Do you send somebody in to say, from our experience, if we looked at this specific community and studied its demographics, etc., here would be some ways in which to start thinking about how you might do something like this?
Yeah, interesting question. I do believe that demographic information is an important tool, and there are lots of demographic companies out there that will help you with that if you want, or you can just get online and read census information. And if you're particularly, a numbers geek, I would say that's, it's certainly one piece of the information that you need. It can show you where there are growing communities, where there are changing communities, and those would be where there are new immigrant groups coming into a community, and that would give you a sign that that might be a place to look at. I don't think that information is ever a substitute for actually getting out into the community. One of the things that would be a natural next step for this group of people, if you were interested in doing that, is doing a community exegesis together. That's something that we do often with groups of people in the United States. Take people out just the way Jesus and his disciples did, going out 2 by 2 into a particular community to observe what you're seeing there. In this booklet, there is an description of how to do that kind of an activity. And it just sort of tells you how to go into a community and what to look for, what to listen for, how to engage a few people in that community in conversation. I would actually suggest that it might be something you might want to try in your own congregation, in your own community. You may think you know your own community around your church or around your home really, really well. But you'd be surprised how much new you can find out about it when you go out with a group of people and begin to explore with that particular attitude in mind. So yeah, yes, there are helpful tools that you can use. Nothing is going to be as helpful as getting out there yourself.
One of the models we've studied over the last couple of years is what's called new monasticism. And I've actually seen effective elements of this work in the United States, not in Canada. But have any of your communities embraced that model, and how does that work out?
Yes. And actually, that's sort of a parallel movement to starting new worshiping communities, and there's plenty of crossover. One of the things we learn is that starting a new worshiping community is very hard work. It can be challenging physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And you can look at that from a variety of different perspectives. But almost every new worshiping community leader goes through a time of a spiritual dark night of the soul, in which they really struggle with their sense of call and their sense of self-worth and purpose. So recognizing that, there has been a real interest in what you call new monasticism, what we call spiritual practices, disciple-making practices. But there's a big interest in things like Sabbath keeping and retreat and prayer and journaling and silence and listening. that really go alongside of this. We find many new worshiping communities, leaders are practicing those kinds of skills. And some of our new worshiping communities actually have formed as Christian communities. And they live together and sometimes in one building, more likely in one neighborhood, commit to a rule of life together. Some of them, like New Abbey in Boston, actually it's a new worshiping community that's also a brewery, and they, like the monks and in Europe, produce beer together and do that work together. So yeah, there is this whole exploration of what it means to be living in Christian community.
And we have a comment from Peter Bush. Just pray and be bold. Presbyterian Winnipeg has done 2 amalgamations and closed 1 congregation and started 3 in the last 6 years. Yes, we're tired, but just trying to be bold and faithful.
Yes, I've actually been hearing a lot about that, Peter, that the Presbyterian of Winnipeg has a lot of creativity going on there. And I would actually try and find a way of lifting that up when the General Assembly meets, and maybe focusing on some of these projects that are going on there. I find that there's nothing better than telling the stories of what is happening out there that's faithful. And we have done it through this project of creating all of these videos. Now, I know, once again, like many other things, it costs money to do that. But you know, you can write stories as well. That costs a lot less. And also, there are a whole lot of people out there that are eager to make their own videos. I mean, that's what YouTube is all about, right? One of the things we did at our last General Assembly meeting, which was in Detroit in 2014, is we sponsored a video contest. And we challenged all of our 150 new worshiping communities that we had at the time to produce a 90-second video about themselves. And we offered some prizes, and we showed those, the prize winners, at the General Assembly meeting. And we got about 50 new videos that came in, and some of them were really excellent. And so sometimes you can tell those stories in ways that will inspire others that don't cost a whole lot of money for you to do, to invest into that project. But telling those stories really helps inspire others.
Me again, sorry for all the questions, but one thing that I'm wondering about is we talked about the age demographic of the PCUSA, same in the PCC, very similar. I think one of the videos I saw of the 1001 new worshiping communities was, I think the state of Oregon has a youth initiative where they actually it's a virtual community of youth. Is that correct? Could you tell us
there's
more
one
about
in one of the videos is in South Dakota, where it's called
South
His
Dakota?
Way, and it's a hybrid. It's partly a face-to-face, but a lot of it happens online.
Yeah. So could you talk a little bit about that particular project?
Yeah, it's one of those projects that happens in a very rural area. South Dakota is really, really spread out. And one of the things that this pastor recognized is that when kids graduate from high school, they also seem to graduate from church. And yet they seem to community is very important to them at that age. Now, in that particular part of the country, many people can graduate from high school and then go on to work on their family farm or family ranch. And they may love rural living, or they may go away to college or just attend the community college in the area. Many of them join the armed services. But they're really longing for a way to be connected that they found in their youth group in high school or in these big youth conferences that happen in the summertime. And so she has gathered together many, many youth that connect with each other through Facebook and through other kinds of social media. They meet in local areas. They have about 6 or 7 different house groups that meet in an area, but then the whole group gets together once a month and they go to a larger town or even a city, worship with the Presbyterian Church there on Sunday, but on Saturday they participate in a Habitat for Humanity project. So they call these things their road trips. So once a month they go on a road trip. In between, they meet in a home or they just connect through Facebook. So I like the fact that she has found, I think, a good hybrid model that includes both social media and face-to-face contact. I have trouble really identifying, unless somebody really gets the technology, communities that are all online. I think they're missing something. I think it's probably possible, but I think most people that have that in mind really just have an idea of setting up a Facebook page, and that's not what we mean by a new worshiping community. But this one called His Way, I think shows a possible way of doing that.
I think you said you were going to talk about leadership tomorrow morning. Yeah. I just had a question about the phrase that you used to describe leadership. And you said that the leader becomes a guest in the community. As I watch those leaders, I'm wondering is it not a matter of everybody becoming guest and host to each other?
Yeah.
Like it just, the way in which they interacted, it sort of suggested both to me, but I wonder if you comment.
No, I think that's really good, a very good observation. And if we're basing it on the Luke 10 passage, we're seeing that Jesus is sending people out into the communities and has a purpose for doing that. But they're going out as the guest of the people there. They're going out completely stripped of all the things that would provide them with security. No baggage, in other words. So without their sandals and without their bag and without any food for the journey, just going out, and they find a person of peace in the community, which is really interesting to me because, remember it said earlier, to all the towns and villages where Jesus himself intended to go. So Jesus hadn't been to these towns and villages yet. So those people of peace would not identify themselves as a Christ follower. In our mind, they would not be the Christian in the neighborhood, but still the person of peace. And so you may be able to think in your neighborhood, who might be that person of peace? In the Northland Village example, one of the people of peace was the principal of that elementary school. She was a person of peace because she was working for the well-being of the community. So they were able to nest in her territory, her domain, and become partners there. But as you said, they then also became the host. They realized that this school was doing a very multicultural school, 90 languages spoken in it. They were able to come in and volunteer and help the children, help the principal. Eventually, the principal ended up joining Northland Village, and she had not been going to church anywhere before. So there's a mutuality of that relationship. But there's also a humility involved and a vulnerability involved in going into the neighborhood rather than a command and control kind of an attitude. We have so often as Christians gone into communities with the idea that we know what those people need and we know how to fix that community. In fact, we even use the term those people, fairly regularly. So what does it mean to go in to become part of this community as the learners, not the teachers, the ones who are the guests, not necessarily the hosts? Other questions?
Just a comment on that. I was sitting in a session meeting of a church, which I will not name, and one of the elderly elders actually used those words, those people, and I just felt my skin crawl. But that's the kind of thing that you have to be able to discern and work with.
I worked with a church. It was not a new worshiping community. It was a traditional church that was working on trying to become more missional, more engaged with their community. And they recognized that one of the things they had done for decades was run a food pantry where people from the neighborhood, those people, came in every Tuesday afternoon and got food. And the people who passed out the food always called them those people. When those people come in, we're going to give them this, this, and this. They got to decide what the people needed. And they also spent a whole lot of time over those several decades complaining about the fact that here they passed out food every single week, and those people never came to church in our church. Why are we doing this? Those people never will come to our church. So as they started doing this self-examination to think about how they could become a more missional congregation, they started listening to themselves with more reflective ears. And they started realizing that just calling them those people was damaging their relationship. And that if they were going into this with the expectation that those people would come to our church, that wasn't a very missional attitude. So they decided to fine everybody if they ever used the word those people. So they had a jar, you had to put in a quarter if you ever said those people. They said, well, what term can we use instead? And they decided that they were going to refer to them as our neighbors. So the people who came in for the food pantry were our neighbors. And they decided to let go of the idea that they would be coming to church on Sunday morning. But they said, but you know what? Our neighbors may want to pray. They may have a desire to be part of a Christian community. And so they decided that instead of expecting them to come on Sunday morning, they were going to pray on Tuesday afternoon as they were passing out food. And so they decided to open 45 minutes early and invite people into their chapel and just see if they had anything that they wanted to pray for. And so the service was very brief. It might have a little bit of reflection on the word and a reading of a scripture passage, but mostly it was prayer. And they found that, lo and behold, their neighbors were very interested in doing that. But the thing that was most surprising is the pastor who had sort of led them in this transformation came down with cancer, and she was very, very ill. And they found that their neighbors were praying for Pastor Kelly. And they were finding that the people that were passing out food were being prayed for every week. The people with the bad attitude about those people were finding that their neighbors were praying for them. And it was just a real transformative experience. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Any other questions?
Just a comment. That last example that you gave is very telling, because what you've got, and I'm always worried when we say traditional and new, and because then you start to divide people into categories. But what you had there was trad new, right? Because it was a blend of the two in the one place.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I hope that you're getting the sense, and if I haven't said this explicitly, it's certainly an oversight on my part, that I think new worshiping communities are important for the work that they're doing in and of itself, but even more important for the impact that they can have on the whole of the church. So I do think that thinking of them as the research and development arm of the church has some real advantages. My brother is an engineer who's always worked for companies to do research and development, and sort of a mantra of research and development people is that any company without an R&D department is eating its seed corn. In other words, it has no future. And I think in the traditional Presbyterian Church, maybe this is just in the United States, there's very little room for experimentation. Ask any pastor who's tried to move the baptismal font from one side of the sanctuary to the other side of the sanctuary. I've seen people lose their job over that. And for some people, that actually could be a career ender. So where does the innovation come from? I think one of the gifts that this ministry provides us with is an opportunity to try some new things. And not all of them are going to succeed. In fact, I think one of the greatest gifts the ministry gives is the permission to fail. We don't have much of that in the Presbyterian Church. I don't expect that every one of the 1,001 new worshiping communities is going to survive. In fact, it would be a mistake if they did. I know that my brother would probably lose his job if everything on his design board ended up becoming a patent or a new product, because it probably means he was not being experimental enough. And so while I hope, I'm not looking to start failures, I also hope that we are being creative and innovative enough, trying enough new things so that not everything is going to grow and mature, but we're trying.
To that end, how do we capture those experiences of the ones that don't make it and learn from them?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and one we continue to wrestle with. the other thing I hope I'm not leaving you with is that I know the answers to all of these things. I really don't. We have conversations about that a lot. We actually have one of the videos on our list that doesn't exist, that the community doesn't exist anymore. The Presbyterian asked us to take it down off of our website, and because they strongly requested us to do that, we took it down from the website. I still show it occasionally because I want people to know that there are some really cool things out there that for various reasons, sometimes for very good reasons, do not reach maturity. In fact, I don't even like to use the word failure. I think that sometimes we just, they're not sustainable. They didn't last. I think we don't necessarily learn from our failures, but we learn from reflecting on them. What are we going to do differently next time? And I think that's an important piece of the puzzle. One of the things we've talked about is coming back to some of these same communities like Northland Village 4 years later and telling their story now and having them talk about, well, what went wrong? What went right? I love when we get together in conferences and leaders are willing to be vulnerable and talk about the biggest mistakes they've made, because that's really where the nitty gritty happens, where the rubber hits the road. It's an exciting thing to be part of. And it's really, we don't know the answers. We don't know what the future holds, but I remain convinced that God is up to something new in our midst and is seeing fit to use denominations to do that. You know, even the state-old Presbyterians, God is seeing fit to use us for this new thing that God has in mind.
Well, thank you very much, Vera. You have been very stimulating, given us lots of things to dream about tonight.
Yeah.
And we're looking forward to coming back tomorrow morning. Vera had recommended some books, and Crux Bookstore is going to be here with some copies or order forms as well for you. And I want to remind everybody that on Tuesdays, Knox has a weekly worship service, which is going to be at 4:30 in the chapel, following which there's a community dinner. So you're all invited to stay and carry on the conversation. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning.
It's great to be with you today and look forward to seeing you again. Do you know if I have to do something to eject that, or can I just pull it out?
Actually, I think you can just pull it out.
Okay. I will do that then.
Well, actually, no, but we need to close it now.
Okay. Go for it.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Oh, it was really good to be here, Maud.
I hadn't planned to come in the morning, but I'm going to try to make it.
Oh, good.
I was wondering if I could get one of these books.
Sure, grab one.
Thanks.